more. That was so good. That was so good. Yeah, we can do questions. How much time do you have, Mark?
I'm good. Yeah.
Good for a little bit. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Drew, did you have a question
I can
you
show
think we should
whatever.
answer, or?
I think there were two things. I might have missed one, but one thing that might be quick is, will this project be available to reverse engineer?
Sure. Yeah, I'll probably clean it up a little bit, maybe get the rest of the error flows in, and then I'll make it a pattern.
And then the other one was about referencing variables in custom JavaScript functions.
Gotcha. Yeah, it might be. You mean, do you mean custom JavaScript functions? Well, there's two ways. Let me share my screen again, and we can talk about the two different methods.
It's Trojan. He's saying, can you show if we can reference variables stored on page in a custom written JS function in Bildr?
Yeah, so there's two different ways to create custom JavaScript, right? So one way is I have a flow. I'm just going to call this, custom JS function here. And I just add that action called run JavaScript function, right? And I can just type whatever JavaScript I want in here. And when this flow runs, it's going to execute that. So this is one way to add custom JavaScript. Another way, and probably the more it's more complex, but it's also becomes reusable, is to create an action type and an action type function. And that's actually how all of our action types work. So for instance, like this get cookie one, this is an action type that has these two arguments. What's the cookie name and what variable name am I going to set it into? And then it runs two functions. It runs the get cookie function and it runs the set variable function. You can also inside, so these functions will just be in your inside of your, basically in your project, if you've used any actions that use those functions. So some ways you can do this stuff to answer these types of questions if you're a coder is if you come into these different action type functions that exist in here, you can actually see how we interact with the core in here. But Drew might be better about talking about referencing the variables directly. I'm trying to think of one that would be good in here because there's two ways to do it. One way is to use our function that does the set and get variable, but the other way, Drew, is in the boppy. Do you know of a good one that I could open up that has it?
Trying
to think of one.
It's funny because we don't reference I save variables a lot from here. I don't usually get variables a lot from inside these, but I'm trying to think what they would be.
Yeah, the reason that we don't usually get variables, like the reason that we, like me and Drew and others on the team don't, is because we're typically referencing referencing them inside of action arguments, which it's built into the type, right? So like if I wanted to change this from variable, the core goes and does that. But I'm trying to think of an action that does it. We do have it in here in an action type that we can just like reference. But basically all it is, there's a core set of JavaScript called the boppy, the Bildr API, that's in the core of Bildr. And there are methods in there for just about anything. So like you can reference a variable, you can get data out of fields, you can do all kinds of things that just make it easier than having to do it manually in JavaScript.
If you go to page set variable, you can show basically what it looks like. It won't be the exact right thing, but this will set a variable and you can see there's a line 3 there. There's a boppy helper.set page variable with some arguments. So there's like a ton of those for everything, for running a Bildr flow, setting a page variable, getting a page variable. And they're like, I don't even look at I didn't know these when I came into Bildr. They already existed, and I just look in other actions to get them. I've never even looked at documentation of them. So, but there's a lot you can do with those, and this will be an example of one.
And in any Bildr project, you can get to all of that right here. There's these right here: boppy auth, boppy core, boppy JS, boppy model, and boppy proto. So these are actually super powerful. If you come and look at these, like this auth protocol here, you can just run our auth protocols that execute in our backend for doing like third-party auth and stuff. You can see exactly how we do it. And it's not actually that complicated of a set of code in there. And I think the helper functions are in here, right? Maybe they're in model. I can't remember where they are. Yeah, so here's the method for getting a page variable. Yep. So it's literally just get page variable. you specify the page, you specify the variable name, and that's basically it. And then it's going to return to you the value that's in that variable. I think that's how that works.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. Like you have to know JavaScript to kind of read through these. And like sometimes I don't even know what one of the parameters does because I don't even understand some complicated JavaScript. I'll just put null for that parameter and it'll usually work. But that's kind of the level we're dealing with here until we get the documentation all in place, and then, you know, it'll be a different story.
Yeah, but if you get everything, like if you got your function basically going, except for how do I reference this variable? How do I reference a variable in the current page or whatever? If you chatted that to me or Drew, we can go, like, we're not the people who wrote the core stuff here, but they're on the team still, right? So I can go just take that and be like, hey, Darrell, can you just tell me what to put, what line, and then I can just send that back to you and you'll know how to do it from there on. But it should be the get page variable is the method that you'll use inside boppy.model.
And you can write that in the JavaScript function, right? Like you can write it in here in the actions for sure, but I think you can also use it in the function.
Yeah, you should be able to do it inside of that function, which is not a real thing here, but you should be able to do that exact same thing in here because this is still going to run through the queue. Just like the way that this works is it sets that function into the queue, just like the custom function is set. So it should have the same scope as the regular functions that go through the normal queue. It should work just the same.
And then I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but there is another method that I would say is more of like a hack, but you can actually get the variables that are on the page by doing like the brow form path, you know, sorry, Mark. You can actually do that in this JavaScript function. And you're basically, I think you're essentially looking in the cache and getting the variables from the cache if you do that.
Yeah, I can show how that works for the coders on the call here. So if I like inspect, actually let's talk about variables generally for just a sec. So there are some things here that you can type. One is called BRW, which is browser, short for browser, form root. And that's going to give basically the entire object of the root page. And one of the things in there is _vars, which will show you all the existing variables on the page. So any variables that are in the root are just accessible there. And we can share all this too, and wherever you guys want to share it. And we are working on docs for this. We've worked with a couple different people to try to get docs going, and like it doesn't work out, unfortunately. So we need to get docs going for all this stuff. But _vars is what you're going to be looking for to just know where they are. The other thing that Drew was talking about is you can actually inspect on a page. So like if I open this up and I inspect an element on this particular page, and then I come here and I right click on it and you do store as global variable. When you store something as a global variable, what it does in here, I'll go to the console so we can see it. It actually sets a variable called temp whatever. So you can see that temp1 is that, it's actually highlighting it on the browser there. So what it just did is it set that as temp1. Once you've done that, you can actually run some of our internal things. Like I can run get value and it'll show me what's in there. I can also do temp1 dot that br that we started with. If you type that in, you'll start to see some things pop up. I can go get HTML out of there. I can go get all kinds of things out of here that we use internally. And do you remember, Drew, what the syntax is here? It's this one.
One you have up right there. Yep.
That's this one. So this browser form object is the first thing. So it's saying the object that I'm in, that I've scoped here, then get me the form of that, which is in this case, that create customer page that's in there. And then get me the variables of that form, which in this case, there are not any variables right now on this at all. But basically now you can get the context. Like if you're trying to debug and understand like what's in the rows and you don't want to go display it. So you have a set of rows or something like that. And you want like, something's wrong in that third row. I don't have the right data or something. You can see what's in the variables by doing this. So we use that quite a bit especially in the more complex systems. Now, all of this, what we're showing, needs to be put into documentation, but it also really needs to be put into a debugging tool so that we can, because we already have JavaScript API basically around all of this. As you can see, that's what this is, you know? So really what we need to do is basically allow you to just slide in a little panel that says, show me the current browser form objects, or show me the current variables on this page, or select a page and show me the variables of it, or even just like a hierarchy of all the pages is really what I would want to see. From the root, show me every page that's opened, and let me just navigate inside of there in real time. We also already have inside of the queue, which runs the JavaScript functions that are inside of all the action types. That queue already has a JavaScript API around it. So you can do things like run JavaScript on the page that pauses that queue and plays the queue and gets the information about the current things executing in the queue and shows you the history of the queue that's executed on that page. Like, it's already all there. We just don't have UIs around it yet. But we already use it to debug like really complex things. When we have hundreds and hundreds of flows running, it gets to a point where you're like the Bildr project is so big that sometimes you literally can't see what all is running because it's all running in separate threads too. So it's kind of crazy. So we've built all this tooling for ourselves and we just haven't been able to get it out to everyone yet. All right, what other questions do we have? I'm sure there's some more.
There's one. Alec left, I think. He asked about importing a big Xano table. We should probably look at that later because there shouldn't be a problem with that. But he said when he imported 16,000 rows, it didn't work.
Into Xano?
From Xano into Bildr, I think. Yeah, from Xano into Bildr, and it worked with smaller table with fewer records, but not with that many. So I feel like that's specific that we should look at because it's supposed to work. I mean, I don't know any reason why it wouldn't work.
Like doing a get on a table in Xano with 16,000 records and trying to display them. I bet it's because if you don't put a limit on the grid, it's going to literally try to
paginated in 50. So that's why I think it's a bug or something.
Yeah, if it's paginated at 50, then it should be no problem at all.
But I also think he left. So I think, yeah, the other one, Abdo just re-put in. I think that might be the same question about handling deleting from a grid and then basically refreshing the view of that grid.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you fetch all the items again, or is there a better way? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, so are we talking about with third-party data or with just a grid in general?
From Xano.
From Xano. Okay, so like you go out, you delete the thing from Xano, and you want to remove it from the grid. Okay, so the way that I would do that, I'm just going to use the grid row here. I'll just drop this on over here. And then I'm also going to drop a grid list element here. Let me move this out of the way because it's going to get overridden. Oops, didn't mean to click off. And select that row page here. So now we have this grid element here with that row page being displayed. So whatever actions run inside of this row basically are specific to that row. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to, on click of this button, you're going to go delete this current record out of Xano. Right. So I'm going to go events, and I would say a new flow called delete, or whatever it is. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up an API call that's going to go delete it. So we would go through that whole set of steps, but go use the delete API endpoint and give it whatever it needs, probably like the ID or something like that. The other thing that I would do is, oops, my goodness. You can actually use this action called remove this from parent grid, and it will literally just remove that row from the grid display in just one step. You could also go re-get it all and reset it all. And in this grid, you need to make sure that your diff key is whatever the unique value is from whatever third-party API. Now, 99% of the time, it's called ID. That's why that's defaulted in there, because it's almost always that. But if you do this, then what'll happen is the grid's real smart. It's got data in it. You set a bunch of new data into it, and it'll go reference that ID value inside of each row and only add whatever it needs to add and change whatever it needs to change without like totally redoing all the data. So especially if you're working with large data sets, that's really useful because it won't like refresh the whole thing and the user won't see a refresh. So those are the two pieces you want to deal with. One is fastest way, just use this remove, and it'll just use JavaScript and remove it. The whole array indexes, everything will get reset automatically inside the row. So if you're like referencing next row, previous row, it'll automatically shift all that for you. And then if you are resetting the data, which you do still need to do sometimes, just make sure your diff key matches whatever the data unique value is going to be. I think that's probably it.
Cool. It says, I think that worked.
Cool.
All right. Let's see. Jeroen is asking, is there a way to pull in fields in a dynamic route which aren't data bound to a field?
Yeah.
And also I know like routing is something we still have like a session we want to do on. So I don't know if you have a quick answer to that one.
Yeah. I have a real quick answer. So let's make this sign up response just get a value from the URL, right? So it's not bound to data. It's not doing anything like that. It's just coming from the URL. So I'm going to do that with a flow. And what I'm going to do is in the page load, we're going to set value. So we're going to set an element's value. And the element we're going to set is the sign up response. And where we're going to get the value for that response is from the request. So the request is that URL. And then you have to tell it where you're getting it from. So there's 4 main ways that happens. One is called a named parameter, which basically is well, it's a little more complicated, but let's do the segment. And the segment's like 90% of the time, or the query string parameter. So let's go with segment 0, which is going to be the first thing after the slash. Okay, so we're going to set into the sign up response whatever's the first thing after the slash. So if I go here, sorry, this zoom was in my way, and I go slash mark 123, and then I hit enter. So on page load, it ran that and just set mark 123 in there. The other thing you can do is if it's a query string parameter, you're going to define the name of it. So a query string parameter is where it's like question mark something equals something, right? So let's say it's name equals mark. Okay, so I'm going to get whatever the value of name query string parameter is. So you'll use this a lot for like, say you do like a tracking or like a referral system or something like that. A lot of referral systems will use, they'll have this and they'll go question mark, referral ID equals or something like that. Referral ID equals whatever it is. So we'll go mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and hit enter. And now it's putting that in there. And then the third common one is anchor, which you can use for doing things like scrolling to stuff, or if you want to do something custom off of it, it should scroll to it anyways if you've anchored things properly. But if you want to use JavaScript to do that scrolling, you can actually use an anchor and whatever's in that like hash. So it'll be hash, whatever this is. I think it's just like this, right? I can't remember if it's slash hash or hash.
No slash.
Just
unless
hash.
it's the root page, a slash would work.
Gotcha. So I think it'd just be like that, right?
Yeah. We can put it in because it's the root page, but if you had another page like slash,
right.
About, it would be about
and
pound.
Then
no extra slash.
Yeah, so that won't actually work the way that I have it here, but I think you can see how that works. Yeah, and so that's it. So you basically, the thing is that this input argument type, that's what we call these, they're input types. So on input arguments where you're setting values, you can just get the value to set from anywhere. And this request one is what you use to pull things out of that URL. So this input types thing is like actually super powerful. You can do, that's how you do concatenate and math and pull things out of the system. Like you can do things like, are they on dark mode, right? And then shift to dark mode, that kind of thing.
And I think the second part to that, if it's not clear, is, to get the actual data from anywhere, you pull it from the URL in that way, and then do whatever action you need to get that data, whether it's from the Bildr collection or somewhere else.
Yeah, and you could actually like set a variable instead of setting that value, right? Like I could set a variable and then use that, reference the variable later, or I can just not set the variable and just always reference it. So you could even, like if you're, say you're doing you want to get a set of data and you want to filter it by something in there, you can just use that in the filter, right? So if this was from a data collection, which I only have, I didn't create any collections in here, but if I add a filter and I'm going to filter, say the login ID, but it could be whatever field you're filtering on. And again, you just pull it from the request, from the query string of, search. And then now it's going to filter that by that. And same thing with if you did, say, search grid rows. This is kind of a fun one. It's like if you're searching that grid, you choose the grid you're going to search, which is just my grid list. the value I want to search, pull it from that request in the query string called search. So this is like, go do a Google search and it just grabs whatever's up there, takes all that and applies filters and applies searching and does all kinds of things. You can just use it however you need to use it.
Awesome. Jeroen, you're good?
Yep, happy. Thanks.
Okay, that's what I like to hear. All right, so one last question. I think it's Chem Swift is asking about hosting prices. If we have any update on that.
No update that we can share just yet. It's coming though. But I promise they will be fair. I'm liking the pricing. I think we've got it to a point now where everybody's going to be happy with it. And the one thing you should know for sure is it's pricing that scales with usage. It's all usage based. So if when you're in like your normal, you just launched, you don't really have any traffic, you're probably not even going to hit a tier that costs you much of anything at all, if anything. But as your app scales and grows, then you get charged, just like we get charged. We just basically want to do like a pass through kind of thing.
Yeah, and I would recommend turning metrics on for your project, which you can access if you either have a Studio Pass or Bildr Pro. And you can kind of get an idea for how much data is being exchanged in your project. So per environment, all that stuff. So yeah, that will be super helpful.
These are the 4 things that you'll get charged on right here. So this is what we're basing all of the charges on. So one thing to note is that it's data records and documents loaded, like the size of those, not how much you have stored, but how much you actually use. So if you put a giant database in there of 30 gigs, we're perfectly fine with that. But if you have every user requesting all 30 gigs every time they do anything in your app, right? And it's just like, give me 30 gigs, give me 30 gigs. That's where our costs come in. The storage is like super, super cheap, but the in-out is super expensive over time as you get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we're basically charged, we're trying to do everything on actual usage. So like how many API calls and how big were the responses on those? How much data are we having to pass back and forth across all of our systems? We just want to charge you based on what reality is, rather than like, well, we think we can get this much for this tier. We prefer to be like real straight, like here's how much you used, here's how much you charged.
Okay. And last questions, Chem Swift, chat us in the Discord after these. Xano allows logic on within their API. We'll build our APIs do the same. And then that is server-side logic or client-side logic or both. I think
hopefully all of those things eventually, right? But at first, probably not all of those things. But we do have, so just so you guys are aware of where we are with like our understanding of how to do those type of APIs, the previous version of Bildr, which we used for all those years in our consulting practice, already has effectively all of Xano as it exists sitting in there. So it's like server-side logic. It gets really complex in there. You can even do like, you know, I want when this call runs, use these query string parameters plus the body and use these in this other way to go filter other data in that request, use that filtered data to then pass that down as a list of filtered data to filter the next set of data. Like you can do massive queries in one request that go across all your collections. So all of that will eventually make its way into our API backend that we have public for everyone. But it's just extremely complex to do that, right? It's a whole product. I mean, Bildr is sort of like 20 products in one product, you know, like every one of these we have to treat as an individual product and like get the full scope as far as we can, and then go, okay, what are we launching first? And then, you know, you have your roadmap for every one of these products. So, but we've done it all before, including like, click this button and here's your API docs, you know, all that stuff we've had for years and years.
so. If with the APIs, it'll likely come in stages. Like we'll have the first iteration and then we'll add on to it. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
the first one will be like docs with basic endpoint actions. You know, you can go create a thing, you can update a thing, you can delete a thing, you can get a list of things with filters on it, that kind of stuff. And then after that, we'll just keep expanding it.
Super
Okay,
wonderful. Well,
I
thank
was-
you, everyone. Oh, sorry.
Can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, so I just kept quiet the entire time because I realized most of my questions are really specific to what I'm building. So I didn't really want to bother the rest of the questions with mine. So I don't know if you guys still have a time for that, or maybe I should come back with that later.
Yeah, I think probably in the next one. Or I think, sometimes people think that their questions don't apply, but they do a lot of times. Like it might be really specific to your use case, but normally me and Drew can like pull that out into a really general, like, oh yeah, I've seen that before in this way, and here's the other ways you might see that. So happy to
Yeah.
go into specifics for everyone else if you're happy to like show
Yeah.
everyone those specifics,
Yeah. I actually just have one that's really bothering me because of the way I'm building. There's like these rows that you build. I see with the SAS application tutorial or the pattern or whatever, there's the grid lists. They are arranged exactly the same with the titles, but the titles aren't a part of the grid list. Now, how does that work? How do you get them to fit in exactly like that? And another thing that I also saw is sometimes when I create pages on the canvas, it looks really out of proportion. And when I preview it, it looks fine, but on the canvas, it looks very weird.
Oh, wrong thing. Yeah, I was gonna create a new project from the SAS star, and then I just created it from blank instead. So one second. Let me do that again. You wouldn't believe how many projects I create.
I can think.
It's like I have like 1,000 projects or something. I don't even know. It's funny because like me and Dorian and Drew have all in different successions like hit limits on like how many projects a user can have, and so we keep having to like accommodate these crazy things. It started when it was like 200 and then 400, and now it's like close to 1,000.
Jeez.
It's crazy. So in here, it's all done with CSS. So I think what you were referring to is like, how do you get these rows, the lines on these rows to perfectly line up and
Exactly.
be like responsive across there, right?
Yeah.
And so it's all CSS. So most of this kind of thing is just like, which way in CSS would you like to do it, right? And everybody kind of has their different methods. So there's really no right way, I would say, to doing this stuff. But I can look at how I did it here. I actually don't remember, so I can go look at the style real quick and see. So it looks like what I did was a display flex, and then inside of each column, I just did this manually because I didn't make it dynamic. So it's just like I have 3 columns and I'm only ever going to show 3 columns. So I literally just did width of 33%. And then
okay, I see. Yeah.
And I probably did the exact same thing in here, flex, and then each one is probably 33%. Yeah. So by doing it in percentages, it's always going to do it. This is probably like the simplest conceptual way to do that, but it's not dynamic. So the problem is if you want to add a 4th one, now you got to go to these classes and change it to be
everything again.
25%. Yeah. And in addition to that, if you did it, like if I wanted this one to have 4 columns and this one to have 3 columns, now I have to have a set of classes for my customer list and a set of classes for my task list. So it would get unwieldy pretty quick doing it this way.
Yes.
Yeah, a better way to do this, you can make it dynamic. Well, there's several ways. If you're using Flex, you could actually set all of these to 100%, and it would actually just automatically do it. When I built this, I don't know why I did it this way, actually. Now I'm thinking about it.
I don't think it would line up row to row. Oh yeah, I guess it would.
It would.
They're all the same number of columns. Yeah.
It would, yeah, because it would be the same in both. So you would do like 100% here and 100%. Like if I change that to 100%, it's not actually going to cause a problem. You see, because the way Flex works, this is just, you have to know how CSS operates in these different ways. But the way Flex works is it takes all those ones that are there, and if they don't have flex grow or shrink properties on them, it just applies them based on what their width settings are. So if they all have 100%, it's going to go, okay, well, they're all trying to be treated the same. So that means there's 3 of them, make it a third, a third, a third.
Yeah.
Just does
Okay,
it.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But
Um,
Drew can probably tell a better way, maybe.
Well, you know what, the thing here is that like this is basically like semi-advanced CSS. To make like a spreadsheet layout like this is like you have to kind of get deep into the either flex, which is what he's showing here, or there's another display property called grid that you achieve the same thing in a different way. And so like I would use grid probably if I were doing this, but it really doesn't matter if you use flex or grid. What matters is that basically you Google how to do them in CSS and you learn the concepts of like what flex is and like how it treats its children and what happens when you wrap it or don't wrap it and there's all these little things. And once you wrap your head around that, you can create the layout. But it's like to give you like a little bit of an idea. Like I've been coding for 20 years or whatever, making applications that exist in the world. And then one of my products is like a spreadsheet. And when I was coding that was the first time where I actually learned how to do this for real, because there's so many edge cases that like, even as an experienced coder with CSS, it wasn't working, columns were getting messed up. And it's just like a pretty challenging CSS.
I actually have one right now in my, if you go into here, if you have more, let's see if any of these have more. Yeah. So like if I have more columns than fit in here, you see how the color gets chopped right there. I don't know if you can see it because the contrast is
I can see it.
That's me not getting the CSS just right in there. So like Drew said, I mean, you could have done this hundreds of times and there's always like some weird edge case where it doesn't quite fit the narrative that you thought it was going to fit. Cause you want, in my case, scroll left and right and scroll top to bottom. So it's like a full on spreadsheet view. And it just gets more and more complicated as you go. And this is always a trade-off that we have at Bildr. Like there's a table view element that you can use, but you lose a lot of flexibility when you do something like that, because then you have to have like a specific option for every single thing. So like me making a custom header with all these different things on it, like I wanted this specific menu, I wanted it styled this way, I wanted all this. If you don't know CSS, using a table view that has some settings for those things is great, but you're limited in what you can build and what you can look like and how you can interact with it.
Yes, exactly.
Once you learn it though, like I built this UI using Bildr in the exact same way that this is built, with just a few more pieces to it. So like the headers are dynamic on mine. Like the header row is dynamic. It actually gets the list of fields and sets it in. It's a grid inside of a grid inside of a grid. It's kind of crazy. But once you get there, you can literally build anything.
Yeah. Another thing that I wanted to ask was that sometimes like the page that I made looks weird. Like it doesn't look the same way when I actually preview it. If that makes any sense. Like this way, everything looks in proportion. But on my pages, it looks completely out of proportion. Like I actually have to go to the preview to edit the CSS again and make sure everything looks fine. Is there maybe a reason why that could be, or something that I'm just not smart enough that I did it wrong?
It's almost every time I see that, it's because there is a height or a width or both using VH and VW settings.
Yes, I actually do use VH on the one to completely set the image.
The reason that happens, let me show you why that happens. Let me just zoom this to 100%, and then I'm sorry, Command 0, get that to 100%, and then now I'm just going to zoom out here. Okay, so what's happening on this canvas, and this is something that, like most other, when you're in a view like this on most other tools, you're in like an image mode. Like Figma, for instance, is an image. That's just images sitting on this canvas. So they use HTML5 canvas, and it's this perfect pixel to pixel zoom in, zoom out thing going on there, because it's not actually rendering HTML and CSS in there. It's actually just like generating an image and displaying it. It's almost all SVGs over there that scale infinitely. In Bildr, we're actually rendering the real HTML and CSS. So like if I do this and I inspect here, now this is actually the same UL that you'll see when I open this page. If I inspect that same thing, it's also a UL, we're not faking it. So it creates a couple of complex things for us to solve. One of them is the scaling in and out, the up and down scaling. we have to use CSS scaling, and then we also have to do like pan and zoom inside of that, which is super complex to do with JavaScript. That's why, like, if you use a mouse to go in and out, or a trackpad to zoom in and out, it kind of does this jumping thing because it's not quite perfect yet.
Yeah, I've realized that as well.
So for the same reason, if you use VW on this page, say to set the width of the page or set the width of something else, that width is actually using this width out here, right? Like my full width of my entire window of my outer
Okay,
browser.
that actually makes sense. Yeah.
And then in addition to that, we're then scaling that width to this percentage inside of there. And so it like adds a whole other layer. At first we were faking it, and we were going, take VW, instead of, if it's VW, kill VW, make it percent. So do 100%. But it caused other edge cases that were worse in other scenarios. And so we were like, you know what, we're not going to try to attempt that. We're just going to leave it as is. So that's most likely, that's where you're seeing those discrepancies. Everything
Okay, so
else
maybe
should be the same.
what I could try is to maybe set a static value to that while editing, and then just while previewing or going to the normal thing, just set it back to VH or VW.
I mean, you can, but I use VW and VH as well. And the main places that, like, if I'm using it overall on the page, it doesn't cause any real issues, other than if I open this on my laptop, the same studio workspace I'm looking at here, the actual width, if I have this outer width in VW on my laptop, it'll be a little narrower than on my iMac desktop, you know, because it's just pixel density there. And so it changes like the view and the size and the scale of things in context to the studio workspace. It'll change that context depending on how big your computer screen is. But if you're only using it on the outer, that's usually the only ramification for it.
Well, you still have to change it. You're right. You have to, like, if you have a VW set, it's going to cover your other pages in the studio. So you'd want to either hide it when you're working, or you can, like, what I actually do is just move a page. Yeah. Like if I have a VW and it's spreading out really wide, I just don't put anything to the right of it. I just put the other pages below it. But you're right. Like you would have to do something like that. And really, like that sounds worse than it is. It's not really a huge hassle, especially for me, like coming from code. That's what everything is. Like that's nothing. Like I'm so used to looking at things in a preview and they're different in the studio anyway. So
like I'm also used to looking in a different window and then actually coding in a different one. Just one more question. I'm sure you guys will have to go now. The picture format, what should that be? Because I'm putting in a lot of profile pictures from Xano, and I've realized that none of them load in. They all just show that there's something wrong.
Any format should work. So yeah, maybe there's something else going on there.
I've actually checked a tutorial as well that someone was busy doing it on YouTube, one of you guys' videos. And it was done so quickly, they thought maybe there was just something wrong, but I've realized it with every photo that I've used.
Are there any like unique characters that would potentially break that?
Or it might be like a relative position, and if you're not relative in Bildr. Like I bet there's something specific in there. I don't think it's like a Bildr element problem.
You know, so it'd be like so you have an image like this, like a URL to an image in Xano like that?
I just quickly have to make completely sure, because I actually do most of like the API calls and stuff like that to build the back end someone else is currently working on. But I just have to make completely sure because I have it here in front of me. I just need to see if I can find the image.
If it's an image with a...
I think it's a file. I don't think it's a URL, to be honest. Yeah, I think it's a file.
Yeah, if this is like a file, you know, if it's in here as a... Do they have like a file?
I think storage might be what...
Storage, yeah. Yeah, I think if it's in here like this, so let's just call it file. I'm not sure. Okay, so let's upload, like here's a collection pass. Like I'm not
Because
sure
I'm-
how this will what you get. You might have to do something like parse into the response. Like it,
Yeah, something like those kind of fields give you an array usually that'll say like a bunch of different file sizes with URLs and some information about the file. So I bet that's what it is, and we'd have to look into what it returns.
it's probably
Yes,
like,
because I'm going to have to, like, the reason for why I'm here today is because of the authentication. So obviously I'm going to use Xano as a backend, and all these files like the user profile picture, all these things are going to be stored on Xano in this way.
yep. Yeah, and this should be fine to do. It's just there's like when you get this row 1, it's going to have like all your property names, and one of them will be file or whatever the name of that column is. And then inside of that column, it's going to be some type of JSON. So it's not going to be the actual path by itself. It's going to be like, a JSON array or a JSON object. And so depending on how Xano stores that, you'll have to basically use a path. So the way to do that is going to be, and I'll just go on let's go on this customer grid row here. What I would do here is you're going to get that back into a variable, and you're not going to be able to just bind it directly. So you're not going to be able to go here and go from variable directly.
Yeah,
Well, actually you could.
that's what I'm trying to. That's what I did now.
Actually, I think you
if you know the
could.
path, I think.
You just have to do a dot notation in the path to know what it is. So like if it's, let's say it was the file and it's a JSON object, and the property name is source or something like that, the column name file and then dot source would get just that source and set it as the value of that image, and it would work. If it's an array, you might have to do something like 0 in there, dot source. So it'd be like file, the first record, and then 0. It might be like, it just depends on what's in there. It might be
I see it. It's yeah, they just return like path, name, type, size. So like, I don't know if this will paste in, but they paste something that looks like this. I just paste in the chat. So you'll just have to call it specifically like file.image.path.
Let me see. I see. So it'd be like,
Or maybe it's just file.path. I don't know.
yeah. So I think it'd be, is image the name of the column?
I don't know because I just looked in their docs quick, but I think image would be like like probably file.
Yeah, yours is currently file.
So it'd probably be like image dot path, but path is not going to be, it just depends on what that path is still. Like it might work if this is a full path
Right.
to it, but if it's like this, where it's just slash blob slash, you're going to have to string that together with whatever the HTTPS : / whatever comes before it. Cause it just depends
I
on
think you get your own Xano URL for the endpoint. So maybe you have to put that in front. It's a Xano specific thing, but this is the concept to find it. You probably have to go through a few steps to really figure out what that value is.
So if you have to string other things together, like let's say Xano is only returning this and they're not returning the full source, what you would do is you would, instead of doing a binding like this, you would remove that binding and go into the page binding flow and add an action, a set value action, and set that image with a concatenate, where you put in whatever is supposed to come before that, like, API.xano or whatever it is. I don't remember what it is, but API.xano / my endpoint / and then, oops, sorry. And then from there, you would go from the variable on the current page image.path. And what that would do, so basically you have to go find out in Xano, and this is the same for like any other API. It's all about how that API is returning it to you, but you can do it in one of two ways. If it's a direct relationship, you can use the data binding and just put a dot notation in. If it's not a direct relationship and you need to like manually string some stuff together, you'll use a set element value action and just use a concatenate type for the value. And you can string anything together you need in there based on whatever it's missing from the data. So this would do it, but knowing exactly what it is, if you can't figure it out, if in the response, rather than binding like this image element to that field, bind a text box to it, and it'll return this for you.
I can't see that. I'm
Oh,
not sure if
return
it's
the,
just me.
Oh, sorry.
Stuff I chatted in the paste.
It'll return that
Paste,
whole
yeah.
thing, the whole, basically whatever's in that field that Xano's giving, because they're not giving a source to an image file. They're giving like a JSON object, you know?
Yes.
And so that will tell you, you can just like bind that image field to like a text box, and it will show you what's actually inside of that field that Xano's returning. And if you can't figure it out, chat that in Discord to us, and we can help you work through.
I think the
I
way
think-
you explained it now with the concatenation, maybe I would be able to figure it out myself. But when you do it yourself, you
Yeah.
usually fall into something where you don't know why it didn't work. But yeah, I think I'll be able to figure it out in this way.
And I think we'll add that potentially. I'll talk to Dorian because he made these actions, but like for the Airtable actions that I made, I do that conversion for you. So the image returns JSON like that for any file type. I switch that in the backend because it's a custom action, so that in your case, you would have just bound it to the image and it would work. So maybe in this Xano action, we'll make it so that it actually, if you have a file type field, it'll just output the path. You know, we can do things like that with these custom actions.
That would be amazing, and I'm super excited for you guys' chat with the Xano team as well, because I mean, like we just realized in this entire talk, there's a few things that can be added, or a few flows that would make things much easier.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
And they'll illuminate.
I actually would have went to their office hours directly after this, but it lasted a bit longer than I thought.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Yeah, I think after next week, we'll have a good understanding of all these edge cases that they probably already have this worked out for, that they can just say, here's all your edge cases that you need to handle in these different places, you know? And then we can go about making all the action types to accommodate everything. But just for sure, even without any of those, there will be a method that you can use in Bildr right now to do it. So
yeah, I'll just have to figure it out.
Yeah, just chat us if you get stuck too. We can help you in the Discord. And conceptually, the way to think about it is, if you don't see the right information coming, or if the information doesn't seem to be being used in the way that you think it should be used, the very first step is like, go see what it's actually providing you. And then once you get that, then you'll start to learn the tricks for like parsing through that data with the paths, or, you know, concatenating or whatever it is, depending on what you get there. But it's always tricky with APIs. Like, everyone is different. And, you know, if Xano goes and changes it down the road, then
yeah, it's true. Then none of it's going to work anymore.
Our default may not work anymore, and you might have to do something in the interim because maybe they didn't tell us that it was going to change. We didn't, you know, so it just totally depends on, there's so many variables there. It's probably a good thing to just know how it all structured anyways.
Yeah. Okay, but thank you guys so much for answering all the questions. I'll definitely be joining the next one because I still have like 3 pages full of questions and it's going to grow while building. So I'll definitely be there.
Yeah, Bildr is definitely one of those tools where you can learn for a long time. Like, it's extremely deep. And what's nice about it too is, like, I'm not a coder, but I'm close to it now because of Bildr, because like I get closer and closer to being a coder every time I use it on something more complex.
Yeah, no, I'm so happy that I know a little bit of HTML and CSS, because I think without that, it would have been a way steeper learning curve.
For sure. Well, thank you for coming and asking your questions. I'm always happy to answer.
Thank you so much for you guys' time. Everyone, really, I appreciate the input, and then I'll see you guys in the next one.
That sounds great, Quinn. Thank you. All right. And everyone else, thank you so much. I will upload this and share it once Mark cleans up his project a little bit, and we'll do a pattern. And then we'll see you guys on the next one. So have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Bye.